like I hadn't been told to leave my own father's table 2 weeks earlier, because in Travis's mind the fight was already over, and I'd already lost. He needed me there, partly, I suspected, because some piece of him knew who actually funded the family's doing great. He floated the costs like a man who'd already spent it. The deposit was down, the menu was chosen. He'd figure out the rest, which in Travis speak meant someone else would. I listened and said almost nothing. He was building a stage, a big, public, well-lit stage, in front of every relative whose opinion my father had spent his whole life managing, and he was doing it on credit that ran straight back to a cushion that no longer existed. I didn't tell him that. I just asked when it was and wrote down the date. Because here's the thing about a man who throws a party to prove his family is fine. He has no idea he's just scheduled the exact moment the truth will choose to walk in. The invitation arrived in my mailbox 4 days later. Cream cardstock, gold script. My name, handwritten. They wanted me there. They had no idea what they were inviting. I held that invitation for a long time. Cream cardstock. My name in my mother's careful hand, the same hand that had folded a napkin into squares while her husband threw me out. Part of me wanted to send it back. A bigger part wanted to skip it entirely, to let the bills do their work while I stayed safely on the far side of town with my new, light, terrible quiet. Going felt like volunteering for an ambush. Then I took out my grandmother's letter and read it again, the way I'd started doing every night, like a prayer for someone who didn't pray much anymore. Don't you ever let this family make you small so they can feel big. And I understood something. Staying away would be a kind of smallness too. It would let them write the ending without me, cast me as the daughter who sulked off and abandoned them, the thief who slunk away when the money got tight. If I wanted the truth to stand up straight, I had to be in the room when it did. Not to fight. I had no speech, no plan to grab the microphone. I just needed to be present, calm, undeniable, when the numbers everyone had ignored finally raised their voice. So I decided to go. I'd wear something nice. I'd bring a gift even, because he was still my father and the man who taught me to drive a nail straight and check my work twice. And I'd bring one other thing, folded quiet in my bag, just in case the night went the way nights like that tend to go. I marked the date on my calendar and underlined it once. 3 weeks out. 3 weeks for the mail to do what mail does. I had a feeling the timing would be just about perfect. It was. I wasn't going to that party to fight. I was going to be in the room when the numbers finally spoke for me. There's a difference between revenge and just stopping the bleeding, and I'm still not sure which one this was. Tell me in the comments what you'd have done. Then stay close, because the mail was already on its way. The notices landed the way I knew they would, not all at once, but close enough to feel like an avalanche to the people who'd never seen the snow building. The mortgage company moved first, a past due notice, then a second one stamped in red, then a phone call. My mother let go to the machine 3 times before she answered. The bursar's office sent Brooks' spring balance with a due date and a polite, unmissable warning about enrollment. And the medical billing service, the one I'd quietly fed for 2 years, started its own slow drumbeat of statements addressed to a household that suddenly had no idea why the bills it never used to see were appearing on the kitchen counter. For the first time in 5 years, my parents were looking at the real numbers, the actual shape of the life they'd been living. The mortgage they thought was worked out. The tuition they thought was scholarship. The cushion they thought was just there, the way air is just there, until it isn't. I heard about all of it secondhand, because I hadn't called and they hadn't either, not yet. My Aunt Margaret mentioned it on the phone, worried, fishing. Your folks okay over there? Your mom seemed real shook at church. I said I wasn't sure, which was technically true. I didn't know the inside of that house anymore. I only knew what I'd stopped feeding into it, and I could picture the rest. The confusion first. Then the blame, looking for a door to walk through. I knew which door it would choose. It always chose the same one. Me. I just waited, and I let the envelopes keep coming, because I had decided weeks ago that I would not say a single word until the truth was sitting on a table where everyone could see it. My mother finally called on a Wednesday night. Not my father. Him calling would have meant admitting he needed something, and Raymond Isbell would sooner sink than signal. So it was Lorraine, my mother, her voice doing the bright, breakable thing again, only thinner now, stretched over something close to panic. Evelyn, honey, I think the bank made a mistake. A mistake? I closed my eyes and let her talk. The mortgage people were calling. Brooke's school sent something about her account. And there's all these doctor bills, I don't even understand them. I think someone stole our information. It would have been so easy to be cruel, to say the word scholarship back to her and watch it land. I didn't. I kept my voice level, the floor voice, the one that doesn't flinch. I'm sorry you're dealing with all that, I said. I don't know anything about a scholarship. And that was true. There was no scholarship. There never had been. I wasn't lying to her. I was simply, for the first time, declining to lie for her. She went quiet on the other end. I could hear her doing the math she'd avoided for 5 years, the slow arithmetic of a woman starting to suspect that the mystery keeping her family afloat had a name and a face, and had been sitting at her Thanksgiving table being told it took, and never gave. Evelyn, she said finally, careful now. Were you? And I didn't answer that either. Not on the phone, not where it could be denied or twisted or buried under, you know how your father gets. Some truths have to be delivered in person, on paper, in front of witnesses, or they never get believed at all. I'll see you at the party, I said gently. We can talk then. And I hung up before she could ask again. Travis, predictably, did not handle the strain like a man who'd ever carried any. With the bills piling up and the cushion gone, his garage lease deadline came and went, and the deposit with it. He started making calls, the kind of calls that begin with, "Hey, weird question," and end with someone politely declining. The party at Caruso's quietly shrank. The back room became the living room. The catered menu became, "Your mother's cooking," which everybody loves anyway. He spun every downgrade as a choice, intimate over flashy, family over fuss, but you could hear the seams. And then he did the thing I'd been waiting for. The thing men like Travis always do when the floor tilts. He went looking for someone to blame, and he found me. He called, and there was no charm left in it. "I don't know what you said to Mom," he started, "but this whole thing fell apart the second you decided to get petty." Petty. I almost laughed. He told me I'd abandoned the family over a comment at dinner, that I was punishing 2 old people because my feelings got hurt, that real family doesn't keep score. Real family doesn't keep score. From the man whose entire life was a tab someone else kept paying. I let him talk. I'd learned, on the floor, that you don't argue with a patient who's coding, you just work the problem. So I worked it. "I hope the party's nice," I said when he ran out of accusations. "I'll be there." And I hung up, and I sat with the ugly little truth of it. He still didn't know. None of them did. Not really. Not yet. They felt the cold but couldn't name the missing warmth. They were all just 3 weeks from a room where it would finally have a name, and the name was going to be mine. Brooke found out before the party. I'd hoped to control how she learned it, but a billing office doesn't care about your timing. She logged into her own student billing portal first, the one she'd never had a reason to open, and the whole payment history was sitting right there under her name. No scholarship, no grant. Every semester marked paid in full by a recurring payment from an outside payer. When she finally called the bursar's office to make sense of it, the tired woman on the other end only confirmed what Brooke was already staring at on her own account. The payer on file was listed as Evelyn Isbell, and the recurring payment had been discontinued effective the spring term. My sister called me that night, and I knew the second I heard her breathing. Evie. Just my name, the way Grandma used to say it, and then it all came out in pieces. The phone call, the woman's voice, the name on the account. Her own name, attached for 3 years to a lie she'd repeated with exclamation points and gratitude to the sky. "It was you," she said. "The whole time, it was you." And Dad said... She couldn't finish it. She didn't have to. We both knew what Dad said. "All you ever do is take." She started to cry, the deep kind, the kind that's half shame, and I felt my own chest crack open, because none of this was hers to carry. "Brooke, listen to me," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were a kid. You believed your parents. That's not a crime." But she kept circling it. The horror of having been the one I gave the most to, and the one who'd parroted the cruelest lie back without knowing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. And there it was, the question I'd dodged for 3 years, finally asked by the one person who deserved an answer. I gave her the only one I had, because I loved you, and I thought love had to be invisible to count. I was wrong about that. Grandma told me so. Here's the thing I have to be honest about, because the easy version of this story flatters me and the real one doesn't. Before Brooke understood the whole shape of it, before the bursar's office spelled it out, she sent me a text in a panic that I will never forget. It came the morning the spring balance posted, an automated alert hitting her student portal. She didn't know yet that it was me. She only knew her tuition, the tuition she thought was free, had a balance and a deadline and a warning, and she did the natural thing. She reached for her sister. Evie, why did my tuition suddenly stop? There's a balance, and they're saying I could lose my classes. I'm freaking out. What do I do? I read it standing in the hospital break room, still in my scrubs, a cup of bad coffee going cold in my hand. And for one long moment, every quiet year rose up in me at once. Every receipt, every stairwell phone call, every time my father called me a taker while spending my money, every time my mother said scholarship in a voice full of pride that belonged to me. I typed my answer slowly. I didn't rage. I didn't explain. I just sent back the truest sentence I had, the one that had been waiting 5 years to be said. I thought I never did anything for this family. Then I set the phone face down and went back to work, because there were patients who actually needed me, and a monitor down the hall that mattered more than my father's pride. I'd find out later that Brooke read it, didn't understand, called the bursar, and learned the rest. But that one line went out into the world first. My father's own cruelty, handed right back to him. And I have never, before or since, felt a sentence land with that much quiet weight. You'd think the truth getting out would have softened them. It didn't. It hardened them, the way pride does when it's cornered, and they did the thing wounded families do best. They closed ranks and picked a villain, and the villain was, of course, me. By the time the week was out, the story had been rewritten in that house. I wasn't the daughter who'd carried them in silence. I was the daughter who'd set them up, who'd made them dependent on purpose, so I could yank it all away and humiliate them. My father reportedly said I'd been buying control for years, which is a remarkable thing to say about money you spent without knowing it existed. Travis amplified it, glad to have a narrative where his own emptiness wasn't the headline. Even my mother, who I think knew better, let herself be carried along because the alternative was facing what they'd done to me, and facing it was harder than blaming me for it. And then, they made their decision, the one I'd half expected. They would handle it at the party, in front of everyone. My father, backed by Travis, would confront me before the whole extended family, lay out my betrayal, and let the room deliver the judgment. They were so sure the relatives would side with them. The ungrateful daughter, the put-upon parents, the cut-off support. It's a story people love until they see the receipts. And that was the part they hadn't thought through, the part that made me almost pity them. They were planning to put me on trial in a crowded room, never once considering that I might bring evidence. They thought they were setting a trap. They were building me a courtroom. And they'd handwritten me an invitation to it. Gold script. My name. Please come. I intended to. The night before the party, I did not write a speech. I still had no intention of announcing anything. The Bills had been doing that quiet work on their own for weeks, and that had always been the plan, to let the truth arrive on its own schedule and stay out of its way. But the family had made a different choice. They'd decided to put me on trial in front of every relative they could fit in that living room, and I was not going to walk into an ambush with empty hands. If they were going to drag the conversation into a crowded room, I would simply be ready to answer it with a record instead of my temper. I've sat through enough family confrontations to know that speeches lose. They sound rehearsed, and rehearsed sounds guilty, and a calm woman with paper doesn't need to perform. So instead of words, I gathered documents. I went back to the folder on the carpet and pulled the cleanest, plainest proof of each thing. The mortgage assistance ledger, 5 years of cleared payments, my name in every account line. The bursar's statements, 3 years of tuition, paid in full, the private payer listed in black and white. The medical billing records, and a single summary page I made myself, because I'm a nurse, and we put the vitals at the top of the chart, one sheet, every category, every total, no commentary. Just numbers. Numbers don't get flustered. Numbers don't raise their voice. I slid them into a plain folder, nothing dramatic, a manila twin of the one in my closet. And then I added the last thing, the thing that wasn't evidence at all. A copy of my grandmother's letter, folded soft, tucked behind the rest. Not to read aloud, just to keep near my heart in a room where I'd need to remember whose granddaughter I was. I laid out my clothes like it was a shift. Something simple, dark, the kind of thing you can't be condescended to in. I went to bed early and slept. Actually slept, because I wasn't anxious, and I want you to understand why. I wasn't walking into that party to win an argument. I was walking in to set a weight down, in public once, so it could never be picked up and used against me again. The truth was already true. I was just going to let everyone see it. In the morning, I made coffee, put the folder in my bag, and drove out to Caruso's. They'd moved it back to the house after all, which somehow made it worse and better. Worse because the living room I grew up in was packed wall to wall with relatives, and there's no neutral ground in a room that watched you learn to walk. Better because home is where truth has the least room to hide. Aunt Margaret hugged me at the door, too tight, her eyes asking questions her mouth wouldn't. The Isbell cousins were there, the neighbors from the old subdivision, a sheet cake with 65 in blue gel on a folding table. My father sat in his recliner like a throne, accepting birthday wishes, healthier looking than he'd been in months, and I understood that the party was as much medicine as celebration, a man surrounded by proof that he still mattered. Travis worked the room in a blazer, refilling drinks, steering the evening toward whatever moment he and my father had planned. I could feel it coming the way you feel weather. I didn't rush it. I found a chair near the edge, set my bag at my feet, and said hello to people who'd known me since I was small. My mother avoided my eyes from across the room, busying herself with napkins and trays, unable to land anywhere. And Brooke. Brooke came and sat beside me without a word, close, her shoulder against mine, a 20-year-old planting her flag in full view of everyone, and I have rarely loved her more. We didn't talk. We didn't have to. She'd chosen, and her choosing was its own quiet thunder. I watched my father laugh at something a cousin said, and I felt no anger, only a strange, steady calm. He'd built this stage to put me on trial. He had no idea he'd be the one cross-examined. The candles were lit. It was almost time. It started with a toast, because of course it did. Travis tapped his glass, gathered the room, and began the speech he'd clearly been polishing. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about family, about sticking together, about how this past month had tested them. And then he turned the knife the way he'd always planned to, smoothly, smiling, eyes finding me at the edge of the room. Some people, he said, think family is something you can just walk away from when it gets inconvenient, when the bills get hard. A few heads turned. My father shifted in his recliner, sitting up, color rising, ready. We've had a rough stretch, Travis went on, because somebody decided to teach us all a lesson. To cut us off. To punish two people who gave her everything. And there it was. He gestured at me, gentle and damning, the prosecutor resting his case. My father took it from there, because he couldn't help himself. Because the rage had been waiting weeks for a room this size. He pushed up out of the recliner, pointed a thick finger across the heads of his relatives, and his voice filled the house I grew up in. She abandoned us, he said. Her own parents. Cut off her own family and left us drowning, and for what? Because I hurt her feelings at dinner? He looked around for agreement, and he found the soft, uncertain quiet of people who don't have all the facts. All she ever did was take, he said, slower now, savoring it. The same old verdict, the daisy cutter he'd been swinging my whole life. And the one time we needed her, she proved it. The room held its breath. Brooke's hand found mine and gripped it, and I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. That's the part I want you to hold on to, because it's the part that mattered. I stood up in my father's living room with 30 relatives watching, and I spoke at the volume you'd use to tell someone their coffee's ready. You're right that I stopped paying, I said. I want to be clear about that. I did stop. My father's chin lifted, vindicated, the room leaning his way. And then I bent down, opened my bag, and took out the folder. I just think everyone should know what I stopped paying. I didn't throw the papers. I didn't wave them. I walked to the folding table with the sheet cake, and I set them down one at a time, like dealing cards, naming each as it landed. This is the mortgage on this house, 5 years, every month, from my account. A statement face up. This is Brooke's tuition, 3 years, every semester. There was never a scholarship. It was me. Another, face up. A sound moved through the room, low, the sound of 30 people recalculating at once. These are Mom's medical bills. The gallbladder surgery, the blood pressure medication. Face up. And this is the cushion in the household account that Dad gave to Travis. That was mine too. He was handing out my money and calling it his. I set down the summary page last, the one with the total at the top, vitals first, and I stepped back. You said you always had it handled, I said quietly. These are the payments that handled it. Every one of them under my name. So yes. I stopped. Because a month ago, at that table, you told me I'd never done a thing for this family. Aunt Margaret had picked up the tuition statement. Her hand was at her mouth. The papers were moving now, passing hand to hand around the room, and with every pair of eyes that dropped to the numbers, my father's face lost a little more of its certainty. He looked, for the first time in my life, afraid. My mother broke before my father did. She'd been standing near the kitchen doorway, a tray of something forgotten in her hands, and as the papers went around, she set it down on the counter very carefully, like it might shatter, like she might. And then she started to cry. Not the bright, breakable performance I knew, but something rawer, something that had been held under for 18 years. I'm sorry, she said, and it wasn't to the room. It was to me. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. The relatives went quiet around her. We should have told her the truth a long time ago, she said, the words tumbling now, unstoppable. About the money, about all of it. She looked at my father, then at the cousins, then back at me, and she confessed the thing I'd suspected for years but never been able to prove. When she was 16, we had her college fund, and Travis got in trouble, real trouble, money he owed to people you don't want to owe, and we used Evelyn's fund to make it go away. All of it. A murmur went through the room. Travis stared at the floor. And we never paid her back. We never could. And every year she did more for this family, it just reminded me of what we took from her, so I told myself it was small. I called it little favors. Because if it was little, then what we did to her was little too. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. It wasn't little. None of it was little. She rebuilt the very thing we stole from her, and we let your father call her a thief. It was the most honest my mother had ever been, and it cost her everything to say it in that room. I didn't hate her in that moment. I just felt very, very tired and very seen. My father did exactly what I knew he would. He exploded. It was the only move left to a man whose entire identity had just been laid face up on a folding table next to a sheet cake. He couldn't argue the numbers, so he attacked the only thing he had left, the narrative, and he did it at full volume. You did this to humiliate me, he roared, and the recliner rocked as he came up out of it. In my own house on my own birthday, you brought all this to embarrass me in front of my family. His face was red, his hands were shaking, and the louder he got, the smaller he looked, because the room had already seen the proof, and his volume couldn't bury it. Relatives shrank back. Aunt Margaret put a hand on his arm and he shook it off. He was a man drowning in a flood he'd insisted didn't exist, and his only response was to yell at the water. And I stayed calm. That's the inversion. That's the whole thing. The part I'd promised myself in the car. I did not match him. I didn't need to. I let him be loud and I stayed quiet, and the contrast did all the work that shouting never could. When he finally ran down, breathing hard, glaring at me across a room full of stunned relatives, I answered him at the same low volume I'd started with. No, Dad, I said. I didn't pay so I could humiliate you. I paid so you would never have to feel humiliated. For 5 years, every neighbor who thought you were doing fine, you were doing fine because of me. You just never knew it was me. The silence after that was the loudest thing in the house. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I wasn't finished, but what was left wasn't an attack. It was a closing. I looked at my father standing there with his fists slowly opening, and I felt the last of the old fear leave me, the fear that had kept me silent and useful and small for 15 years. A month ago, I said, you told me that if I had any self-respect I'd leave, so I did. I left. Quietly. I didn't argue, I didn't make a scene, I just did exactly what you asked. I let that sit. The only thing I took with me was my own name off of payments I'd set up myself. And the bills? Dad? The bills are just the sound of you finding out what I was actually carrying when I walked out that door. I reached into my bag one more time. Not for evidence this time. I took out my grandmother's letter, the soft folded one, and I held it but didn't open it, because some things you don't read aloud to a crowd. Grandma Ruth knew, I said, and I watched my father flinch at his mother's name. She knew what I was doing for this family, and she left me a letter about it before she died. She told me to take care of you all if I could. But she also told me not to let this family make me small, so the rest of you could feel big. I looked around the room, at the cousins, the neighbors, my weeping mother, my silent brother, my sister's hand still tight in mine. I'm done being small, I said. That's all this was. Not revenge. Just me. Finally, standing up straight. And I set the letter back in my bag, and for the first time in my life, my father had absolutely nothing to say to me. The room had turned, and everyone in it could feel the new direction. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody booed my father or threw a drink. It was quieter and more final than that. It was the way Aunt Margaret moved to stand beside me instead of him. The way the cousins who'd been nodding at all she ever did was take, now couldn't meet his eyes. The way a neighbor set down the tuition statement he'd been holding and said, softly, to no one in particular, "My God, Ray, she saved the house." The story my father had spent a month building, the ungrateful daughter, the put-upon parents, collapsed in the space of 10 minutes. Not because I'd shouted it down, but because I'd simply set the truth on a table and let the room read it for themselves. Travis had gone gray and silent in his blazer, the master of ceremonies with no ceremony left to master, and I almost felt sorry for him, the way you feel sorry for anyone caught standing where the tide goes out. My mother crossed the room and put her arms around Brooke and me both, and the three of us stood there in the middle of that living room while the party reassembled itself into something else around us. My father lowered himself back into his recliner, looking older than he had an hour before, looking, finally, like a man who'd run out of story. I didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat about. I hadn't won a war. I'd just stopped losing a quiet one I'd been losing my whole life. Brooke leaned into me and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Evie." And I told her the truth. "You don't owe me an apology. You never did. You were the one good thing I'm proud I paid for." Here's what happened after, because I know you want to know, and because the after is where the real boundary got built. I didn't cut my family off. That was never the point. Cutting them off would have been just another way of letting my father's words define me, the taker who finally took everything away. Instead, I did something harder. I put everything in the light. Brooke's tuition I kept paying, but directly, to her, out loud, with her knowing every dollar. She took a part-time job at the campus library anyway, not because I asked, but because she wanted her own skin in it, and I let her, because that's what dignity looks like when it's still young. The mortgage, I would not simply resume. I sat my parents down, the two of them, no Travis, no audience, and I laid out terms like the professional I am. The payment would move into their name, with a financial counselor we'd see together, and whatever help I gave would be a decision I made each month as a free person, not a debt I owed as a hostage. My father didn't argue. He signed where the counselor pointed, quiet, humbled in a way I'd never seen, and once, only once, he looked up at me and said, "Thank you, Evelyn." Cracked and rough, and real. It wasn't an apology, and I didn't pretend it was. But it was the first time in 15 years he'd acknowledged out loud that I'd given him anything at all, and I decided to let that be enough for now. Travis moved out by spring. No garage, no empire, just a regular job an hour away, and a lot less to say at family dinners. We're cordial. That's all. And that's fine. My mother and I are slowly finding each other again. Two women who spent too long folding themselves into smaller squares, learning out loud how to take up space. And Grandma Ruth's letter lives in my nightstand now, not the back of a closet, where I can reach it on the nights the old smallness tries to creep back in. I still work the ICU. I still keep a steady voice while everything falls apart. But I don't disappear into other people's needs anymore. I help when I choose to, and I let it be seen. That, it turns out, was the lesson the whole expensive decade was trying to teach me. Love doesn't have to be loud to be real, but it should never cost you the right to be seen. That's where I'll leave it, at a birthday table where the quiet finally added up. The folder marked family, the tuition that stopped, the cruelty that started it all, and the truth I sent back. If someone has made you feel like you gave nothing while you were giving everything, you don't have to shout to set the record straight. You just have to stop holding up a wall that was never yours alone and let them see what you were carrying. Set your weight down with dignity, not noise. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs it,